The invasion of Poland in September 1939 stands as the tragic catalyst that ignited the flames of the Second World War. It was a crisp autumn morning when the silence of the border was shattered by the roar of German engines. Germany launched a massive offensive from the west, utilizing devastating Blitzkrieg tactics designed to overwhelm Polish defenses with sheer speed. These tactics prioritized total air superiority and rapid armored breakthroughs, effectively shattering the fragile peace that had held across Europe. Stukas screamed from the sky, targeting communication hubs and rail lines to paralyze the Polish military response from the very start. Panzer divisions surged forward, bypassing strong points to create chaos deep behind the front lines, leaving defenders isolated and without clear orders. This aggressive maneuver forced the hand of international powers, ending any remaining hopes for a diplomatic resolution to the crisis. The world watched in horror as the rapid pace of the German advance threatened to dismantle the sovereign nation in days. Within just 2 days of the initial assault, Britain, France, Australia, and New Zealand formally declared war on Nazi Germany. This rapid escalation signaled the transformation of what began as a regional conflict into a truly global and catastrophic struggle. Diplomatic cables flew across the Atlantic and the English Channel, as leaders realized that appeasement had finally reached its bitter end. The declaration of war brought a somber realization that the coming years would be defined by unprecedented sacrifice and industrial-scale warfare. Despite facing overwhelming odds and a massive technological disparity, the Polish military mounted a fierce and determined resistance against invaders. Polish cavalry and infantry units fought with desperate courage, attempting to stall the relentless momentum of the mechanized German war machine. Every village and river crossing became a site of intense struggle, as the defenders sought to buy precious time for their allies. Polish forces attempted to hold their ground against a superior enemy, desperately awaiting the promised support from their Western allies. The hope for a second front in the West kept morale high among the troops, even as supplies began to dwindle rapidly. Communication lines were constantly under attack, making the coordination of a unified national defense an increasingly impossible task for commanders. The bravery displayed by the Polish defenders highlighted the sheer scale of the tragedy as they stood alone against the Wehrmacht. Yet, just as the situation seemed dire, a new and unexpected threat began to emerge from the shadows of the eastern border. On September 17, the Soviet Union launched its own invasion, crossing into eastern Poland under the terms of a secret agreement. This sudden betrayal from the east caught the Polish High Command off guard, effectively trapping the army in a deadly pincer movement. The dual invasion turned the struggle into a fight for national survival against two of the most powerful military forces in existence. Polish soldiers now found themselves fighting a war on two fronts, with no hope of reinforcement from the east or west. The sheer weight of numbers from both sides made the position of the Polish army increasingly untenable as the days passed. Despite the hopelessness of the situation, pockets of resistance continued to hold out in cities like Warsaw, refusing to surrender immediately. Civilians were caught in the middle of this geopolitical storm, facing the brutal realities of aerial bombardment and advancing ground forces. The destruction of infrastructure meant that food and medical supplies were scarce, adding a humanitarian crisis to the military disaster. Warsaw became a symbol of defiance, with its citizens building barricades and preparing to defend their homes street by street. The German Luftwaffe intensified its campaign, turning the capital into a landscape of rubble and fire to force a quick capitulation. Even as the city burned, the radio continued to broadcast messages of resistance, inspiring the nation to hold on for one more day. The coordination between German and Soviet forces, though not always direct, effectively squeezed the life out of the Polish defense. Military units were forced to retreat into the forests, attempting to regroup and continue the fight as guerrilla forces against the occupiers. The dream of a swift victory for the Allies faded as the reality of the German-Soviet partition became painfully clear to all. Poland fought fiercely, but was overwhelmed within weeks, its territory divided between the two totalitarian powers that had conspired against it. The fall of the country marked the end of the interwar period and the beginning of a dark era of occupation. Millions of people found themselves under the control of regimes that sought to erase their culture and suppress their national identity. The swiftness of the collapse stunned military observers across the globe, who had expected a much longer and more balanced conflict. It became a case study in the power of combined arms warfare, changing military doctrine for the remainder of the century. The tragedy of September 1939 would serve as a grim reminder of the cost of failing to address aggression before it escalates. As the dust settled on the battlefields, the true scale of the human suffering began to emerge from the occupied territories. Families were separated, and the social fabric of the nation was torn apart by the policies of the invading forces. The resistance did not end with the fall of the army. It merely transitioned into a clandestine struggle for freedom and survival. Underground networks began to form, laying the groundwork for a long and difficult fight that would last until the end of the war. The events of those few weeks in September had set the entire world on a path toward total, unrelenting global conflict. Britain and France, though unable to save Poland, were now fully committed to a war that would span every continent. The strategic landscape of Europe had been fundamentally altered, with the balance of power shifting toward the axis of aggression. The lessons learned during the invasion of Poland would be studied by every major military power in the years that followed. It was a brutal introduction to the nature of modern war, where speed and technology could overcome even the most determined defense. The bravery of the Polish people remained a beacon of hope, proving that a nation could be conquered but not easily broken. This opening chapter of the war set the stage for years of conflict, forever changing the course of human history. The sacrifice of those who fought in the first weeks of the war would be remembered as the initial spark of resistance. As the world plunged into darkness, the memory of Poland's struggle served as a rallying cry for the Allied cause. The geopolitical map of Europe was redrawn in blood, creating a new reality that would take years of war to resolve. Every major decision made by the Allied leaders in the following years was influenced by the failure to prevent this initial catastrophe. The invasion remains a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming and systemic violence. Historians continue to analyze the tactical failures and the political miscalculations that allowed the invasion to succeed so rapidly. The legacy of September 1939 is etched into the collective memory of a generation that lived through the most destructive war ever. It serves as a permanent warning about the fragility of peace and the importance of collective security in an unstable world. As we look back at these events, we see the beginning of a long journey toward the eventual restoration of freedom and justice. The situation for Poland deteriorated rapidly when the Soviet Union invaded from the east on the 17th of September 1939. This maneuver was conducted in secret accordance with the protocols of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed between Berlin and Moscow. This dual-front assault effectively sealed the fate of the Polish nation, trapping the military in a crushing pincer movement. With enemy forces advancing from both sides, organized defense became impossible, leaving the Polish army with no clear retreat. Although the Polish troops fought with immense bravery and tenacity, they were ultimately overwhelmed by two massive totalitarian powers. Within a matter of weeks, the combined might of the Wehrmacht and the Red Army shattered the remaining Polish lines. This swift collapse marked the beginning of a brutal occupation that would see the country partitioned between the two invaders. Its people were subjected to immense suffering throughout the remainder of the war, as their sovereignty was completely stripped away. The fall of Poland did not just represent a military defeat, but the start of a dark, transformative chapter in history. This tragedy would fundamentally reshape the geopolitical landscape of Europe and the wider world for many decades to come. As the German panzers rolled across the western border, the world watched in horror as the Blitzkrieg tactics unfolded. These rapid, mechanized strikes were designed to paralyze the enemy before they could even mobilize their full defensive capabilities. The Polish Air Force, though courageous, was quickly grounded by the overwhelming superiority of the Luftwaffe's aerial bombardment campaigns. Communication lines were severed, leaving local commanders isolated and unable to coordinate a unified response against the German advance. In the west, the Polish soldiers held their ground at the borders, but the sheer speed of the invasion was unprecedented. Every village and town became a potential battlefield, as the German forces pushed relentlessly toward the heart of the country. The civilian population found themselves caught in the crossfire, fleeing their homes in a desperate search for safety and refuge. Meanwhile, the Soviet invasion from the east came as a devastating blow to the already strained Polish military high command. The Red Army moved with calculated precision, aiming to secure the territories promised to them in the secret pact protocols. Polish border guards were suddenly confronted by a second enemy, turning the defensive strategy into a chaotic, desperate struggle. The pincer movement tightened, cutting off supply routes that were essential for the survival of the remaining Polish army units. Despite the hopelessness of the situation, many soldiers refused to surrender, choosing to fight until their final rounds were spent. The Battle of the Bzura stands as a testament to the fierce resistance offered by the Polish forces against overwhelming odds. Yet, the lack of support from Western allies meant that Poland was essentially fighting a war that it could not win. Britain and France had declared war, but their armies remained largely inactive, failing to provide the necessary relief for Poland. This period of inactivity, often called the Phony War, left Poland to face the full weight of two empires alone. The infrastructure of the nation crumbled under the relentless pressure of aerial strikes and heavy artillery fire from both sides. Cities like Warsaw became symbols of defiance, with citizens building barricades to slow the inevitable march of the invading armies. The siege of the capital was brutal, with constant shelling that destroyed historic buildings and claimed thousands of innocent lives. As the defense of Warsaw faltered, the reality of the occupation began to set in for the exhausted Polish population. The partition of the country was finalized in the streets, as German and Soviet soldiers met to divide the spoils. This meeting of the two totalitarian regimes signaled the end of an independent Poland and the start of dark times. The administrative structures of the Polish state were dismantled, replaced by harsh regimes that sought to erase national identity. Intellectuals, officers, and community leaders were targeted, as the invaders aimed to eliminate any potential for future resistance movements. The tragedy of September 1939 was not just a military failure, but a profound human catastrophe of immense historical scale. Families were torn apart, and the social fabric of the nation was shredded by the policies of the new occupiers. The world looked on as the map of Europe was redrawn, with Poland serving as the first victim of this conflict. The lessons of this invasion were stark, demonstrating the terrifying efficiency of modern warfare when used against a smaller nation. The spirit of the Polish people, however, remained unbroken, laying the groundwork for the resistance that would follow later. This resistance would eventually grow into a massive underground movement, fighting to reclaim the sovereignty that was stolen away. The invasion remains a pivotal moment, showing how quickly a nation can be overwhelmed by the forces of total war. It serves as a grim reminder of the consequences of failed diplomacy and the dangers of unchecked aggressive expansionism in Europe. The events of those few weeks in September changed the course of the 20th century in ways that are still studied. Historians continue to analyze the strategic blunders and the heroic efforts made by those who defended their homeland so bravely. The memory of the invasion is deeply ingrained in the Polish consciousness, representing a time of extreme sacrifice and sorrow. As we look back, we see the immense courage of those who stood against the tide of history in 1939. Their struggle was the spark that ignited a global conflict, drawing the entire world into a fight for human freedom. The story of Poland in September 1939 is a story of resilience in the face of absolute, overwhelming military force. It is a narrative that highlights the fragility of peace and the importance of standing together against common threats today. The devastation left behind was total, but the resolve of the people to survive remained a beacon of hope. Every corner of the country felt the impact of the occupation, as daily life was transformed by fear and uncertainty. The legacy of this invasion continues to influence international relations and our understanding of the nature of modern warfare. We must remember the sacrifices made during those dark days to ensure that such a tragedy is never repeated again. The fall of Poland was a warning to the world, one that many chose to ignore until it was too late. Today, we honor the memory of those who fought and died during the invasion, recognizing their place in our history. Their legacy is one of endurance, serving as a powerful example of what it means to defend one's home country. As we conclude this chapter, we reflect on the profound changes that occurred during those fateful weeks in September 1939. The world was never the same after the invasion, as the global order began to shift toward a new reality. This was the beginning of a long and painful journey for the Polish people, one that would define their future. The invasion of Poland stands as a definitive moment, marking the start of the most destructive conflict in human history.